And we're back. Do Did Will, the Story of People podcast returns for another week. We're going to dive into the world of podcasting a bit this week because it's a busy space. A lot of people are getting into it. And who better to have on than the CEO of one of the biggest in the land and one of the most popular people in the land and in the space? It's Todd Cochrane, CEO of Blubrry Podcasting. He's an inaugural member of the Podcast Hall of Fame, which I think is quite amazing that there is a Hall of Fame for podcasting. So welcome to the show, Todd. How are you, man?
Brent, thanks for having me. And yeah, it is amazing that there's a Hall of Fame, and actually, the Hall of Fame returns to Podfest in January of this year, when we'll be inducting some folks. So it's exciting.
What's the criteria for a pod to make it into the Podcast Hall of Fame?
They do have some time criteria, but essentially, we basically, any of us that are in the Hall of Fame, we basically nominate people to a list. And I'm pretty open. If someone comes to me and says, "Hey, Todd, I think, so and so is deserving," I'll add him to the list. It's just not, it's not just who Todd thinks. It's, who we think, as we get input, and then that list then is voted on by the inductees. So it's truly, as the list of inductees grow, then the number of people voting. So, that's kind of the criteria how to get on the list to be voted on.
You particularly, what do you actually look for? Is it something like about like as you mentioned, time? Is it sort of like quality of show, more of a groundbreaking person that might have changed the landscape of this space?
I think it's all the above. We've had inductees already that have wildly popular shows. We've had folks that have been more behind the scenes. So really, there is a pretty wide criteria, and definitely there's people that have made major impacts that are not in the Podcast Hall of Fame that I hope will be able to be inducted at some point, because you just look at some people's names in the news a lot, and these are the types of people that have helped move the space forward and helped us all. All boats have rose together because of these individuals.
It's an amazing space. Like, I mean, I've been in it for a few years. I'm about 125 episodes in. So, and the changes that have happened in that time, and the different variations to land where I am now with Do Did Will, it's taken many forms. I mean, we've had a pandemic through there. It started with me traveling around and searching for all the best coffee in the world, and then feeling like I needed to change that format, and then talking to a ton of colleagues. It's just amazing where it can kind of go. And I want to dive into that. But the first thing I definitely, I appreciate you coming on the show. You're busy, but you're a groundbreaker in this space. So why don't you tell our friends at home listening and watching, what do you do?
Well, number one, I am a podcaster still. I create three different podcasts. One's my Genesis show that really started it all back in October of 2004. That's called Geek News Central. It's a twice weekly tech show. And then I do a weekly show that's called the New Media Show. I co-host it with Rob Greenlee. We talk about everything podcasting, and our famous tagline is, "You listen to the show long enough, you'll get a PhD in podcasting." And of course, I do the show for our company, Blubrry Podcasting, which is a full service podcast host. There's three of us that cycle through and do different episodes for the company. But Blubrry itself really is again a full service podcast host company. And today podcast hosting is kind of a commodity. 10 years ago there was 5 competitors to us. Now there's 30. I think, really our main differences is that we believe that content creators should build their brand on their own .coms, build their brands, allow them to build and get that Google SEO juice for the content to be discovered and found. And so, we offer all the standard stuff: statistics, monetization, media kits, all kinds of different tools and stuff that tie into social. We got AI stuff that's on the horizon. So it really runs the full gambit, but we're best known, obviously, for our PowerPress plugin for WordPress. That's used by about 100,000 shows. But for me, it's really about working with individual podcasters. We really, really work with a lot of independents. Now we have big companies that use our services too, but we really work with a lot of independents.
It's an interesting time for this space because there's a billion things popping up online. Or let me help you with your podcast, and let me promote your podcast, and all these different variations of people offering services and offering, the snake oil, maybe like that. They're saying, I can get you 1,000, downloads in 2 days, and
Yeah.
it's kind of uh, interesting to me because the rate, on YouTube, the race to 500 or 1,000 subscribers and the 4,000 watch hours is one side. Then you have the other side of it, which is the audio portion of it, where you're trying to maybe try, you want to be on these charts that maybe Chartable are sending out, or something where you're ranking in a top 10 or top 30. Um, and it's sort of showing growth to your show, or giving you justification as to what you're doing. I've gone through various feelings about that, because why are we doing it? Are we doing it for us? Are we doing it for the listener? Are we doing it to entertain each other? Are you being informative? Are people learning something? There's so many versions of podcasts.
Yep.
So in this Blubrry space that you're offering help for podcasting, do you think that what you're offering is the best, versus someone on Fiverr offering this? Like, what's the difference between what you're offering as far as podcast help, and what somebody on Fiverr is saying? Give me $100 and I'll give you 1,000 listens. I'm very
Right.
curious about that.
Yeah, well, number 1, those folks that are doing that are getting you false listens. So don't go spend your money there because, it's just gonna falsely prop up your show. But I think what we do is we don't do the production of your podcast. We don't do the creation of it. We don't do the promotion of it. We basically provide all the tools for you to do that and integrate with partners that will help you. We got a partnership where we're integrated with Descript. We've got a partnership where we're integrated with Headliner. So basically, those types of we allow you to work within our space, and then we partner with folks that have great tools that we don't want to build. And the thing too, you mentioned the video part, and I think one thing that's unique about it is that we have a true video podcast offering. I've been doing a video podcast for 10 years, and the majority of the time it was not on YouTube. It was actually available via Apple Podcast.
Gotcha.
Most people don't know that video's been available in the podcasting space really since the beginning. So that's something we do offer to our hosting customers, the opportunity to have a true video podcast. You can still have it on YouTube and do that stuff, but you can have a video podcast that's attached to an independent RSS feed. So again, it's the full services and the integrations with the groups that allow you to really, hone your skills and be able to save some time. That's the key. Is that I often say we provide you the tools and services and then get out of the way. Most of the folks that work with us, you wouldn't even know that they're hosting at Blueberry. And that's kind of the way it is. Because again, we want you to build up your brand.
Sure.
And that's really, really important. It's part of our DNA.
What do you say to people that say, well, everyone's got a podcast, I shouldn't start one?
Well, here's the factoid. And you can verify this over at podcastindex.org. It's a totally separate group. I don't have any affiliation with it besides supporting it. Um, there's 4 million plus podcasts in their index, but in the last 10 days, only 230 to 240,000 shows have put out a new episode. And in the last 60 days, that number's around 370 to 400,000. So what it really shows you is even though there's 4 million shows that are supposedly out there, there's only about 400,000 are active. And then you divide that by 30 categories and you do the math on that. It makes pretty good sense to be able to do a podcast to become successful versus having a YouTube channel where you're amongst millions. I think the opportunity to have success in podcasting is huge even today, as long as you're not
Mm.
chasing a topic, as long as you're passionate about what you're doing and can build authority. And it's again, in the podcasting space, we all don't have a celebrity audience. I started with zero or near zero, and build a great following from my show. But it took a lot of work, a lot of time, and time behind the mic, and honing the skills. So I think there's huge, huge, huge opportunity for people. Matter of fact, I say right now, and this is kind of a cliche, it's the best time ever to be a podcaster. because of the number of new episodes putting out, the audience that is listening to shows have not went away. They have fewer choices now because of less being created.
Uh,
So what that is causing is everyone to rise. Matter of fact, we've seen record growth on independent shows over the past year. Numbers, growth numbers that people have never seen before, largely because the listening audience is looking deeper in the stack, which is raising those shows up.
I do it occasionally. I'll have my 12 that I'm subscribed to, and then I kind of poke around for a new one every now and again. Oh, what's that space? And I'm a listener just like I am a creator, so I
Mhm.
like to find ones that hook me, and then if I'm not in, I'll move on. Like it's like listening to music or watching a TV show or anything. I guess whatever speaks to you, that's where you go. Um, so keeping to that theme, then you were talking about starting from scratch. Then let's dive into the did part of this show and tell me how you did it.
Yeah, so I guess maybe part of the do part also is, again, I'm on this mission not only to help people their stories, but know a formula to how to do it or how so maybe this falls into the did is really the key here is long-term consistency of creating content. But just creating the content, let's say you got this great show idea, you're gonna start recording, you're gonna hate episode 1, episode 10 is gonna sound better than 120 and so forth. The show's gonna get better as you find your voice. But really, it's that consistency piece and building a show, and I often ask content creators, said, "What is the goal of your show? Can you define that? Is it the goal to build authority? Is the goal to have a business funnel? What is the goal?" And when you have a goal for a show, then you have the ability to create that content in a way that reaches that goal. As long as that goal stays real lock solid. Now you can shift, like it sounds like you've shifted kind of some of the content you've done.
Yeah,
But for me, it was really about creating that content on a consistent basis, and then not only creating the content, but building the social scene, building the community, doing everything that you need. And there's really largely, I could probably list 10 or 12 things that a content creator can do. I did. I did a book. I wrote a book that was on podcasting. I was able to get a sponsor and be able to support the show. I was able to build a community. I was able to have good social influence. I was able to, part of my goal for my first show was to build enough authority to be able to get a press pass to go to what is called today CES show, which was before referred to as the Consumer Electronics Show. They don't refer to that anymore, but it's just CES show. Was just to be able to get a press pass to go to that event and cover it and bring more content back to the tech show. So it really, the goal of the show has changed a little bit over the years, but really with everything that we've done is to be able to inform and entertain, and again build that community. A lot of times podcasters will ask their audiences to engage them and they don't, it's kind of crickets. They get a little bit discouraged and they get an email that's maybe, oftentimes people complain often before they praise. So I always tell content creators is you just got to go out there and do the best content that you can possibly do, because the cream will rise to the top, and be passionate about your topic to put a show out. Now, creating a podcast is hard work. And I firmly believe a show has to be in someone's ear weekly, if possible. If not, you need to set the expectations to how often the content's going to come out so that they can build you into their lives according to the schedule you're going to publish. But if you tell them it's going to come out on Wednesday, make sure it comes out on Wednesday. And if
yeah.
it doesn't come on Wednesday, make sure you've told them why. Because if you don't, they're really going to they'll find something else to replace you. I've often said, again, people build your content into their lives. They listen to it at a specific time and place, usually, in the treadmill, in the car, on the bus, whatever it may be. But I think the key really point is stay engaging and you make sure you got people leaning in. It is a medium that is unlike any other because you are literally in their head, because they're usually wearing some sort of headphones or earbuds. They might be listening on a smart speaker or something like that. But again, this intimate relationship we have is interesting. I always have a little post-it note here on my computer monitor that says, "Remember, you're talking to an audience of one."
Mhm.
because usually podcasts are consumed alone, and you have to make sure you're talking directly to those folks.
That's a great point, and it's a really great point because I travel for work and I put these episodes out into the universe, and I know personally some people that are following me. I know, I've got friends that are following me. I've got some musician friends that are following me, people from the network, sure. And then every now and again, I'll meet somebody in a far off land that'll be like, "I loved your episode about this," and I'm like, "Oh, there's other people listening." You just kind of forget because you get into this, as you said, it's you're kind of building these out for one person to listen to, but then that could be 10,000 individuals around the world.
Right.
And I've had the pleasure now of meeting some of those people from around the world. And that's been really rewarding going into Denmark or going into Israel or going into some of these places, France and London. And you're like, you kind of, people reach out and go, "Hey, I follow your show and I noticed you're in Europe. Are you going to be here?" And it's like, "Yeah." And then they come and say hello. And it's a really cool feeling. We're not rock stars by any mean, but I'm in a space where I travel and run concerts with rock stars.
That's
And
cool.
when you have an opportunity to meet people that are listening to this little show that you're doing from your basement in London, it's quite something. So I'm assuming that where you're at now, technically, sorry, my words. As you touched on earlier, your first show is way different than where you're at now. So in this sort of did portion of what we're talking about, um, what was that first thing where you're like, "I'm gonna start a show and lead the charge here and actually become, you know, the master of this space?" How did that kind of come together to get you into this Hall of Fame that we discussed before? Um, for the people watching, you'll see this graphic. For the people listening, you can't see it. But um, where does that come from? How did
Well,
you start that?
the journey's interesting. I in the before the internet was really a thing, I run a bulletin board, the old school dial-up ones where
Gotcha.
call in via modem. And when that era died off, I was a blogger for a few years and a failed blogger. And then fate had a had a hand in things. In 2004, I was still active duty in the Navy. And I was accident wasn't a combat accident. I had a swimming pool accident, and it basically grounded me from being able to fly. I was not a pilot, I was a back end guy in P3s. And my recovery from that accident, I was wearing a clamshell, and I ended up out in Waco, Texas, of all places. And in the middle of October, and Waco in October is the coolest place on the planet. So I spent a lot of time in my hotel room in the evenings just surfing the internet. And I found about this new medium called podcasting and being a failed blogger. So I said, well, I can talk. So I recorded my first couple of episodes right there from that hotel room. And in those days, we everything had to be done by hand. It was very a geek thing. You kind of had to be techie to make this work, and it's not like it is today. And I went back to Hawaii and told my wife. I said, "Hey, I'm doing this podcast, and what is that?" And it was costing money. And
Yeah.
she basically pointed a finger at me, said, "You got 2 years to figure out how to pay for this thing." And then November of that year, I got a book deal from Wiley Publishing. There's a whole story about that. So the first book on podcasting was Podcasting Do It Yourself Guide. Sold 45,000 copies. June of 2005, GoDaddy approached me and said, "Hey, we want to sponsor your show." They're still a sponsor of my podcast today, which is again a whole nother story in itself. But
Mhm.
from that sponsorship, there was a question asked to me by that. Um, Their name was Chris Redlinger. She says, "Todd, do you know anyone else who would like to advertise GoDaddy?" And I said, "Yes, I do," because I had formed a network. And I said, "I can't do this by myself." So I went on my podcast. I said, "I need a lawyer. I need an MBA. I need a graphics guy and a programmer. If you're one of those, call into this phone call." And then essentially 10 days later, I found the founders of my company on a freeconferencecall.com call from the
Okay.
audience. And we started this business. And the business name is actually Raw Voice. And we started working on our first product offering. And it really kind of went from there. In the very beginning, we were a media company. Then we changed later to a service business. But all that time, I'm still creating content because I had said to myself, if I'm going to talk about this, and talk to podcasters and try to educate podcasters and give them advice, I got to walk the walk. If you look in this space, there's very few people that actually work in podcasting that do their own podcast. And I don't think they can fully relate with people that are trying to create content. If I'm giving you advice on how to build a show and how to build an audience, I got to be in the weeds with you, doing it at this time, because what we did in 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, none of that applies today with where we're at and where things are moving.
Mhm.
So, actively creating content, actively building an audience was the thing that really drove it through. And obviously, my team, I was not wholly responsible for getting the Hall of Fame. My team was doing so much stuff. So stuff that they did, really, they all deserve that award because we did this together. But at the same time, I've been a big advocate in the podcasting space. Make sure it stays open. Make sure that gatekeepers are not. Yeah, there's a picture of that book. Very dated now. So, this was before Apple Podcast even was involved
Mhm.
in podcasting. So it went out before we went into what was then iTunes. But I think ultimately the journey to the Podcast Hall of Fame was just being an outspoken advocate. And I also run the podcast award. So that added to it as well, and honoring podcasters. And matter of fact, we're having our award ceremony in about a week.
Is that
Um,
online? Is it an online?
yeah, it's an online event, and
Nice.
so it's one of those situations where it's just, I've lived and breathed this literally. In about a week, it'll be 19 years.
Jeez.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating thing to me because 19 years, but you can learn something next week that will change the game again.
Oh, it's
I've never seen a space travel so quick. I mean, tech travels quick, I understand,
yeah.
but just from the beginning of me starting this show, even Do Did Will, like from last season to this season, there's like all these new angles that are coming in. And I think your head can spin a bit and you can get lost in the shuffle. And if I'm, yeah, to your point, if I'm passing on any advice to anybody that's asking about getting into space, it's sort of like just be consistent.
Yeah.
The rest kind of works itself out. But do you what do you say to people that are like, "Well, I'm not getting the listens. I've had these giant guests and no one's listening."
Well,
Like, that's kind of an interesting one because it can be discouraging
sure.
or it can be lightning in a bottle too.
So I hate to break people's bubbles, but audience members come for you. They don't
Right.
come for your guest. Your guest is added value. So you have to be the personality of your show. You have to be the one they tune in for, that love. Rob and I that do the new media show together, our audience numbers are always higher on plays when it's just him and I back and forth versus when we bring a guest in. When we bring a guest in, believe it or not, the numbers drop because it's not as much Rob and I, and it's a weird dynamic. You
Mm.
wouldn't think that. So we really learned over time, they come to hear us. So even though, let's say obviously you're doing an interview show, Brent, they're coming for you. I'm kind of the added value for the show today, but they're really coming to listen to you and what you have to say. So I think the analogy of be quiet, don't talk too much when your guest is there. I think that's the wrong. This is not the medium. This medium is, let's have a conversation. Let's get rich and deep
I
in the
agree.
weeds. Yeah.
I agree that it's very much about the conversation. The purpose behind this for me was to branch out from music and coffee and some of those things and talk to people in different spaces because I do tend to meet a ton of people in different walks of life that are interesting to me that might not have worked on a music based show. So I want to have these conversations where people come out of these shows and learn something.
Right.
So to one side, you're like, yes, maybe they're here to come listen to me speak, but I want to offer value to my listener by bringing in people like yourself that can teach them something. So, I'm no host. I'm a rookie. I mean, I'm sure I'm 125 in. I'm no journalist. I'm definitely not a broadcaster, but I do get a chance to talk to people on a daily basis, thousands a year in just various walks of life, and you just can't help but learn from people in that scenario. And I just want to get that out to the people.
Sure.
I want to get that out and be like, you need to listen to this conversation because this person's going to teach you something. Some people don't want to be taught; they just want to, work out in the gym and run, or they just want to do whatever they're going to do. But the purpose of this gig is to teach. And I'm hoping that people will learn from that, which is why you're here, because I get a lot of questions about podcasting. And I get my friend and your friend, Matt Kundle, has been a very big help in this space uh, from Winnipeg. And he's been an amazing a teacher, and was very, very highly recommended you being a part of this as well. So I just love surrounding myself with these smart people that can help me and help others get to the next level. So it's fun to listen to you explain out how you had to get there, and then but it's still changing for you. How are you keeping up? What are you studying? Who are you talking to
Well,
to
this is
stay
gonna
above?
this is gonna sound amazing, but I listen to 100 new podcasts every 2 weeks. Now,
Jeez.
I don't from that, I might take 300 to find one, but I'm also taking notes, and I'm figuring out what are people talking about, what are they listening to, and then I try to dig in and find specific episodes. But right now, really over the last 3 months, because I am kind of a bit of a geek, hence the Geek News Central name for my Genesis show, is I'm just following this AI space really heavily. And what I've really been doing is saying, okay, how can we help podcasters with some AI tools that are not going to be obsolete in 2 weeks? So, I've spent about 3 to 4 months really looking at that strategy, and we're starting to build some stuff. But I think what I really try to do is, again, I keep an eye on, what are shows doing that are successful? What are shows that are doing that are growing? What are they doing to engage? And really, ultimately, it comes down to just one or two things. Audiences grow because their audiences love them so much that they're sharing it with their friends, families, and people that they know. They'll talk you up anywhere. That's where a lot of show growth happens. Number two is, and it's part of the premises of that I've been promoting for many years, is make sure you've got rich show notes. You got a great episode title, something someone's gonna search for, and a good backup header paragraph to make Google chew on that and say, okay, Brendan's just put out an episode with Todd. We know he's a podcaster. Have some stuff sprinkled in there in that paragraph that's going to make Google say, okay, when someone's looking for information on podcasting and whatever how you may ever play this off, y- or not, shouldn't say play it off, but you have to be able to have people find you through those search results. And that's probably the second biggest way to grow audiences. Not everyone's going to subscribe to your show when they find you, but at least make it available so they can easily
Sure.
do that.
You,
Um,
you touched on AI, and I actually had that question ready for you,
sure.
which is how will AI change podcasting? Now, people are on the fence as to whether they're in or out on podcasting. They're sort of, or sorry, on AI. People are kind of like, well, I don't agree with it. Like, I know the actors and the writers are really having a hard time with
Sure.
AI, and it's definitely changing the landscape of so many industries. But I'm also finding that it can be a big help in some capacity, and podcasting and video and content creation especially, I'm already seeing it. So where do you see that changing as far as landscape wise?
Number one and foremost, original voices are going to win the day here because AI is already creating a lot of digital content. So, in this, doing YouTube, doing podcasts, they're creating some sort of structural informational content. They are now going to be the folks that people are going to trust the most. Now, because they're not going to know what's being created that has not been vetted or has a slant or whatever. So humans are pretty easy to figure. You can figure out if you're right, left, middle, or center. You can figure out who a person is. You can really find out a lot if you listen to a podcast long enough. So I think people are going to flock to this type of content. Number one. Number two, as a creator, in my industry, what I do for tech, and there's new news every day. I just have this endless supply of content that's being fed to me. But depending on your show, like you've got a show here that has an endless supply of people to talk to that has cool things. But let's say you're doing a business show or whatever it may be, and you're like, "Oh, I'm topic tight. What?" So what you could actually use AI for is say, "Hey, I've got an idea," or give me some ideas some topics I can cover for my show. But it's often though you have to put in great input to get great output. So I was in an event recently where it was really broken down, and this applies to not just podcasting, but what's going to happen in the world over the next couple of years. There's going to be people that are super creative, which are a lot of content creators, a lot of thinkers, people in businesses that come up with the new ideas. Those folks' jobs are going to be absolutely safe. They're still going to be the creative types who come up with ideas. But the thunking work, and this is a word Google came up with. I heard this from a Google executive. The thunking, the stuff that's where you're creating forms, spreadsheets, proposals, that thunking stuff within a couple of years is going to be done by the AI. But
Mhm.
on the other side of that, it's gonna have to be the subject matter experts. It's gonna be those folks that verify that that thunked stuff that the AI put out is real and no
Right.
biases, all that stuff. So the people are gonna
Fact
survive.
checkers. Fact
Yeah, the
checkers,
fact
really.
checkers. So the creatives and the subject matter experts are gonna be the 2 spaces that are gonna survive in this for knowledge work. In the middle is gonna be the ones that are being challenged. I eliminated a $5,000 annual bill by doing data analysis of voting of 8.3 million votes of the podcast awards using ChatGPT's code interpreter to say, "Hey, look, here's the 10 questions I'm trying to determine if there was fraud. Look at the data and give me a report." And it took a while
Wow.
to and it basically wrote me a better report than the audit firm that I've often used. So, this is the things that's gonna change. But with podcasting, you're gonna get better show notes, you may get better choices of titles, you're gonna have better summaries. Podcasters have been lazy. I go through all these shows I listen to, and I look at their show notes, and it's a sentence or 2 or a paragraph. That is not enough for Google to chew on to say, "Hey, this is what this content's about. This is why I should make this person the authority on this, and this is why I should send traffic there." I think AI will help that piece more than anything.
Sticking to that theme then, and that to your point, and I'll put my hand up on that. I am very busy with this show, but very busy with the post content and the micro and all the rest of it. My show notes could be a million times better.
Yep,
It's something I desperately need help with. So it's just one of those, as I'm learning, I'm trying to learn. I'm just trying to bring it in, bring it in.
sure.
So to somebody like me, that might be struggling on show notes because there's just so much going on in life. Two-part question here. Is there a point of having a podcast if your show notes aren't good? Because what's the point? You're not getting it out there for Google. But number two, do you think AI will be able to help with show notes by listening to will it come to a point where it'll listen to your show and then actually write show notes for you? I'm very curious about where you think that tech is going to be.
Number 1, you can be successful and not have great show notes, but you better have one motivated audience sharing that show
Gotcha.
far and wide. So you're giving up some audience by not having great show notes. So I always do, and you gotta really think about the title because you record for your audience, you write for Google because your audience 90% of the time are never gonna come look at the show notes. They don't care. Listen to the show on their app. They don't actually go and look at the show notes unless you tell them to go there because you're having a survey, you got merch or something. So they're not even gonna read it, but so you record for your audience, you write for Google. So that covers the show notes piece. But the AI piece, the how I've learned how to use this, and again, we're using the stupidest AI we'll ever use at this given point right now. It's only gonna get better, is I take the transcript that, Blubrry offers the ability for podcasts to get a transcript. I take the transcript that's created and I punch that into ChatGPT or Claude. Claude is better, almost better and I say, "Write me a complete summary
Mm,
of this episode. You tell me what you think was the best part of the show. Give me a title, or maybe give me 5 titles to choose from. Give me some keywords. Give me a Yoast summary." And I ask for 4 or 5 things, and sometimes I have to prod it a little bit because it only give me, like, half of the episode's, summary. and I have to say, "Hey, you didn't analyze the whole thing." You have to treat like a little child and say, "Go back and" you're like an intern, you have to say,
Yeah,
Go back and give me the rest." And ultimately, I get this great summary of the show, and then I can manipulate that. Now, it's taking me longer now to do my post because I'm getting a much deeper but
sure.
90% of it's written. All I gotta do is go in there and fix it, clean it up, run it through Grammarly or whatever you use, because 'cause I'm not an English major at all, and use and basic what I'm starting to see, and I've been doing A/B testing, is I'm starting to see is those episodes where I did it my old way compared to the new way, the traffic's up on those new episodes because 'cause I'm giving Google more meat,
Well, and
and
the other side too is you can go back and retro these, can't you? Like I
you
could go
can.
back and re-show note every single episode, 120 episodes if I wanted to,
Yep,
and put it into the universe and see where it goes.
that's right,
So
and
that's a wonderful piece
and
of advice for
if
everybody.
if you've talked to someone, all of a sudden they're in the news, it's like, bam, here's let me go pull a 60-second chunk out and put that up somewhere social and say, "Hey," so I think there's huge, huge opportunity here, and guess what? Majority of content creators are team of 1. We don't have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people working for us, you
No,
know?
no, we
So,
do not.
we're host, we're marketing, we're
Yeah,
sales, we're
yeah.
PR, so AI allows us to use a force multiplier to save some time.
I definitely have a plan to utilize it a little bit I'm already eased up a little bit on a few things, but I'm trying to still simplify. And that's the thing with podcasting that I've discovered over this time is simplifying the process
Yeah,
because the less work I have to do on the back end, the more content I can put out.
and I
Like it's
think
just, yeah,
and I think a lot of times it goes back to this origin of doing consistent content. Creating content's hard. So if you have a little help that says, "Okay, my show's about this. This is the goal of my show. Here's the description. Give me 25 topics to talk about." And you may have already covered 15 of them, but it may pump out 10 that says, "Wow, I would never have thought about." And maybe
yeah.
that's just enough to have a little creative juice to say, "Okay, here's the next 6 episodes I'm going to work on."
It's definitely helped on, I'm not alone on this very much. It is kind of a guest based show, but when I do decide to maybe look at covering a topic, I have gone into AI and typed in some information about my show, and it actually came back to me with some great points.
Yeah.
I utilized two of them, but I was like, wow, I could build a whole other show just based on their recommendations.
Yeah.
So,
And
uh,
I think it's gonna help. I think it's gonna ebb and
yeah.
flow. I think we'll see what the limits of this are. We're still trying to figure it out.
Oh man, this is a go to school for anybody listening, including myself. Todd Cochrane, CEO of Blubrry Podcasting, is with me this week. How what do you do? How did you do it? And then the final question that we're going to cover here is what will you do next? What's your plan? Where do you want to take Blubrry Podcasting? But what will you personally are planning on doing next?
I'm really on this mission again to help people tell their stories. Everyone's got a story to tell. And it's because of it's really that I continue to say you can I talk to folks. I went to Riyadh last year, and most people don't know things have changed in Saudi Arabia where well, here's a factoid. Six oh, I'm gonna screw it up. 66% of the population is 30 and under. So they had to make massive changes for these young folks be able to have more because either they're that or they're gonna riot in the street. Women can now don't have to be covered up. They can, own a business. It just goes on and on. They can drive. So they've opened it up to allow creatives. So I went to this event and, I'm sitting in front of a group of 100 people, 90% of them women, and they're wanting to tell their story. And they've never had the opportunity. Some of the stories are going to be tough to hear. Some of those stories are going to be exciting. So, it really runs the full gamut of emotions. So I think what podcasting gives us the ability to do is be able to worldwide allow people to share and everyone has something to share. And I think that's the goal here is to continue to open this up. When this podcasting space first started, it was a bunch, mostly men, mostly white guys, Now we go to podcast conferences, and it's very diverse. Women now are leading the podcast content creation space by creating more new episodes or more new shows than men. Women of color have come in strong. It's just, I mean, it's in worldwide. The space is expanding. So for me, it's really about the will. I'm on this mission to help people tell stories, and if we can be part of that, that's great. There's lots of options for hosts out there. There's some that are free. We're a paid host. Again, being in that social economic spot where you can't afford to pay, there's still an opportunity for you to create content. We wish people would be able to come with us all the time. They don't. That's okay. We understand that. Um, but at the end, it's really about let's get those stories out and hear those voices we need to hear. And there's a lot of inspiration out there and things that people are doing.
On top of the trend side of things, you talk about CES, you talk about tech. Is it literally one of those situations where every single day we need to tune in to the world to find out what's changed tech wise? I feel like every day I learn something new about this content space. I find something has changed from yesterday. I've
In
never
the
seen anything like it.
In the end, the tech may change, but the stories are the same. And not same in regards to there's exact shows are like one another. No, no, no. There's unique stories. They're being told by unique individuals that are fascinating, can educate us, can inform us, can inspire us. That really it runs the gambit. Um, and, again, I think in the end, while the entire space is, we talk about AI and we talked about social promotion, that kind of stuff. Still, in the end, it's about the content. People come for the stories.
Mhm.
Why does Joe Rogan attract a certain demographic? Why does This American Life attract a certain demographic? Because they are telling a story that demographic of people want to hear. So, and there's shows that are niche. There's shows that are, where you have a neurosurgeon and he's talking to 1,000 doctors that are neurosurgeons and talking specifically about, changes in their space. So again, I think it all depends on the type of content. There's content out there from anybody. It's really, from basket weaving to zebras. It runs the full scale. It runs
I
the
know.
full scale.
It's quite something. And do you, to your point though about like you touched on a little bit about stories and getting them out there. I've spent a good portion of the year actually in the Middle East this year. So I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in Riyadh, I was in Bahrain. It is changing.
It's
The
amazing.
other show that I'm on with my friend Chris Machete, for whatever reason, and I'm not sure how accurate the Chartable rankings are or whatever, but that show is rocking in Saudi Arabia. At one point, it was like number 3, and I don't know. We're like, what does that mean that we're number 3? And then we were number 1 for one day. We had a bit of a funny day, but I don't. But just it just seemed random that Saudi Arabia had come into the mix, and then now every week on Chartable, we're either up 3, down 3, up 10, down 5. But it's Saudi Arabia is a prominent space, but I also don't necessarily see the crossover. So I wonder if there's a bit of bot world kind of contributing to that. But we definitely touched on something in a episode that was dealing with Saudi Arabia specifically, and it's kind of lived in that space. So um, it's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Podcasting, where is it headed then?
You know, um, I will say one thing about Chartable. They're owned by Spotify now,
Yeah,
and I'm a big privacy advocate, so I don't use their services because I don't wanna sell my audience to Spotify. So, I'm again, now we offer just as you full disclosure, we offer a standalone statistic service, but again, we've been privacy focused from the very, very beginning. We
sure.
also don't do charts, so I understand why you go there to get charts. Where's the space heading is, I think right now, again, because the economy has slowed down some of the higher end production stuff. I think this is a great opportunity and great time to grow a show. It's a great time to start a podcast right now. It's really we're at a point, and there's new things too. And we could spend a whole hour on this new thing called podcasting 2.0. It's about adding new features to the podcasting space. Blubrry, Buzzsprout, RSS.com, and a few others have been on the leading edge of adopting some of those features. So I'm not just going to take credit. We've all been working on that. And it's about trying to build features that expand the capabilities of what we currently have in apps so that we keep the audiences engaged from not only in the app standpoint, but between ourselves and the audiences, ability to go live in podcast apps. There's just this whole plethora and something that's called value for value. So I again, the feature set is pretty significant. So that's what I'm kind of focused on right now is expanding the feature set to make podcasting grow from what it was really hasn't grown in many many years because Apple kind of dictated to us what the expansion was going to look like, and as podcasters, we've kind of taken that back and are
Gotcha.
building out new feature sets.
Well, this has been super informative, and I'm hoping the listener and anyone that's got an interest in podcasting and content creation is learning and taking notes. I've taken a ton of notes on this. I'm gonna, sometimes I put a show out and it just lives out there. I don't often revisit. I go, all right, it's like writing a song. Wrote that song. It's out there. Got to write the next
Yeah,
song. But this particular episode, for myself personally, has been super informative. It's exactly if I'm learning something, I'm hoping the listener and the watcher is learning something. His name is Todd Cochrane. He is the CEO of Blubrry Podcasting. As we've talked about, super, super informative. Where can people find you online? I definitely think they need to find you if they're in content creation and podcasting world. And I want to direct them to there for sure.
sure. To find me personally, it's real easy. I'm the top of the search results from the name Todd Cochrane with an E. Of course, you can come over to blueberry.com. That's blueberry without the E's because, as I kind of like to jokingly say, we couldn't afford the E's. They were $2 million. So, blueberry.com. If you want to check out the service, we got a free 30-day trial just by clicking the button on the website. But again, Todd at blueberry.com is the email address. It's easy. That's the way all my team members are. So, anyone that works at the company, first name gets you to them directly. We've got a great support team to help anyone that wants to start out. So, yeah, that's simple. I'm easy to be found, LinkedIn, everywhere else, and of course, wherever podcasts are consumed. If you want to listen to about podcasting, you subscribe to the new media show.
Spoken like a true pro. I really appreciate your time, Todd. Thank you so much for coming on Do Did Will, the Story of People podcast this week. It's very informative for the listener, for myself, and I'm going to subscribe. I'm going to
Thanks.
jump on board to that space because I definitely am constantly trying to learn, and I learned a ton today. So that's Do Did Will, the Story of People podcast for another week on the Crier Media Network. Todd, come back down the road.
Absolutely.
When the technology changes in 2 weeks, and we'll talk about it again.
Yeah.
Uh, that's Do Did Will, the Story of People podcast for another week. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon.